Welcome to this inaugural episode of the Changelog, which is our new video podcast series at Screenly. And I'm joined today with Daniel, who's my head of product. And we're going to talk a bit about what's going on. And Daniel, do you want to do a bit of an intro to yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been with Screenly for over 5 years now. Started with content marketing, moved into marketing. Once you get people to the product, it has to be a good product. So started doing quite a bit of that, and it's been fun. So
amazing. Yeah, no, Daniel, you've been with us for a while now. It's been really cool to see the growth and now move on to the product. And we have a lot of exciting stuff going on the product side this year. So I'm super excited on the roadmap for that. And maybe we should kick off this episode with a bit of news. I think you had one story you want to chat a little bit about, which is the whole Amazon Fire Stick story that broke a few weeks ago but is definitely having impact on the signage world.
Yeah, sure. So Amazon, of course, has its Fire TV, independent units, and then also the standalone stick. There was a whole ecosystem, or is a whole ecosystem of apps that run on top of that hardware. And one of the main components that, or parts of those apps that make them valuable is being able to bypass the Fire TV home screen. And just within the last few weeks, Amazon basically said no more to that. And it's left a lot of those apps, their communities, their customer base, those businesses, really just out in the open with nothing, kind of overnight, right? So
yeah, but of course, if you do signage, you don't want to require any user interactivity when you reboot that device, right? So absolutely has a massive impact for that use case.
Yeah, absolutely. So signage is definitely one of those main use cases there. And so the overall 40,000 foot lookout on this is that it's not a friendly environment for developers, particularly when it comes to signage applications. So
yeah, it's always in the case when you're sitting in the lap of somebody else, right? When they control it fully, right? Which is why, for us at least, starting with the Pi, you have a lot of more control over the lower level layers, and then you have over something like that, and you see the same thing playing out in a lot of other built-in CMS TVs who built in signage players. Not going to name any names, but they are definitely trying to capture market share from CMS providers and build their own CMS on top of their platform and capture more revenue that way. So it's definitely something that plays out in the ecosystem thoroughly, I think, throughout the entire ecosystem, really.
Yeah. I'd love to have some I'm sure these numbers are not public at all, but what their estimates are, or exact numbers on how many of these Fire TV users are just residential homes trying to watch Netflix, and then how many are these custom things. So someone did those calculations and said, okay, well, screw this. But
yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I know people have done Fire Stick signage for a while, and it's a really, really cost-effective device, and that's because Amazon obviously basically sells the hardware at cost, or might even sell it below cost, because they're going to cover that revenue elsewhere.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, that's some industry news, and things can change overnight. So
absolutely. And then I want to talk a bit about some industry trends, I guess, that we've seen lately. The whole concept of headless CMS is something that kind of been brewing for a while, I think, in the signage industry. And I did a YouTube short on this not long ago, a few weeks ago, and it's really just a fancy word for API-driven signage, right? And I think it's super interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, from a marketing background, right? Like that was the main thing when headless CMS came out, was like, okay, in the past, like content pieces used to be super entangled with code, right? Like if you wanted to change it, you can change it, but that was that one instance. and everything was all intermeshed with everything else, which is fine, but totally not useful at scale. And that historically has been the case for signage, but then that really, I think it's fair to say, got solved with things like Screenly's, digital signage API, where you can really unmarry the actual content items from all the other stuff that gets it on the screen.
Yeah. What makes me excited about this in particular is where signage becomes a smaller piece in a bigger cog, or a smaller cog in a bigger wheel, really, where it's just a natural extension of a product. And that's why, I mean, we've been API first and API bullish on APIs for a long time at Screenly. And that's one of the reasons why we've been excited about this is for that reason. So we can be part of a bigger ecosystem where signage is just one component in a bigger playbook. So that's I'm glad to see a more generic adoption. We've been banging on that drum for quite some time here at Screenly, but I'm glad to see there's a big push towards that in the industry at large.
Yeah, and I think it's also, when you have stuff you want to show, and we'll say not just content, right? Because we can also get into the whole apps thing, as well. You don't want to be constrained to a user interface pointing and clicking. Okay, I'm going to schedule this at this time. Let me upload this content piece, being locked in that system. Because for a lot of digital signage things that you want to do, and I'll say really all the cool ones, that stuff, a human dealing with it is too slow. It's not going to work, right? So if you want to do things like triggering content to show when a customer checks out, a certain item, or Victor, we were just in Barcelona. We saw some friends in the industry doing signage sensors. So when you pick up an item, like pick up a fruit, in the grocery section, it can change what's showing on the signs. You can't have someone behind the scenes scheduling that. So you really need to be able to hook things up with an API, hook them up to your systems, hook them up to sensors, to do the cool things. So.
Yeah, and I explored that in another YouTube short about the push versus pull method, because there are two ways to do Headless CMS, right? You can either do on the device or you can push API changes, and we do both, and I'm glad to see there's more adoption in that in general. I just want to do a bit of a rant or something that been bothering me since ever we started doing signage, which is about zones. And
Victor, this is new to me. I've never heard you go on a rant about a technology topic. So
yeah, I know, but this concept of zones is something that really needs to die, and I think it's so abundantly clear that from the research perspective that we shouldn't do it, and yet it's something that keeps coming back all the time, and people draw inspirations from, I don't know, cable news, and for whatever reason believe that's a good user experience, but the reality is it's really horrendous user experience. You have
it's all over the search traffic, by the way. I'll say that, just in terms of what people are searching online, like, signage zones for signage displays, like, there are thousands of people a month searching for that. So
yeah, and the problem is that people draw their inspiration from TV, right? And they don't quite understand the vector or the medium really for signage, where it's completely different. If you talk about advertisement screens, for instance, you have like a few seconds at most to capture attention. If you dilute that with 3 zones and show massively different content with a ticker and then some other content around that and a live feed, like, you're diluting that attention so hard that none of that content is going to come across. So that's why we never supported zones natively in Screenly, and most likely will never do in future, because it just generates a bad user experience. So just a small rant or something, because it came up recently again.
Well, I mean, I think it comes up because, people see it on, like, feature list of different signage applications, and they're like, oh, wow, zones, that sounds cool. But it's just one of those things that it's not really thought out. Like, it's like, okay, and then what? Like, are you going to be managing, 3 different parts on your screen? And, like, and then, and then that's the thing. Are they supposed to be relevant to each other or interact, or are they just like this rant,
it's I think every time I speak to other people in industry, like everybody knows it's bad practice, but some people just cave to customer demand, and it's I'd rather not. Yeah.
Well, for people showing anything on a sign, I mean, or just anything in customer interactions, it's very hard to hold people's attention. Like that's the most valuable resource. And if you think you're going to do it and split it in 3 different ways, like forget about it. So
like generating one piece of content is hard enough, and the other good content is hard enough. Like try to split that down to 4 different zones, and like you're not going to do that well. That's just the reality.
Well, and you quickly become one of those classic like bank signs that just shows nothing useful other than like the temperature outside, which is hardly useful information often. I saw this thing. It was like what was it? It was like, okay, hey, we're like trying to show things to our customers, blah blah blah, and it's like okay, let's show them let's show them a fake version of a thermometer, and the meme's like, first of all, promote it. So. No, it's silly, but I don't know. Hopefully, that trend will eventually die out as people get a bit more educated about what actually works and doesn't work. Cool. And before we switch gear to our product announcements, which is kind of the purpose of this changelog, like a bit of updates on industry, and then maybe a rant, but also product updates. And the first thing I guess we should announce is the new BYOD program that we announced, the Bring Your Own Device program, and where we're essentially trying to open up our platform a bit to larger enterprises that do want to do a bit of brownfield deployments, where they have, for instance, a fleet of Intel NUCs that are been largely used for signage for the last decade, and they want to retrofit them for Screenly. That's a program we opened up, and we are taking beta customers for right now. So if you're interested in that, go to the blog at screener.io/blog, and you'll find the blog post about BYOD programs. Yeah.
All right,
Victor. I mean, what was just before we move on from that? I mean, share some of like the behind the scenes talk on that. Like, what was the philosophy? Why? We currently have player options, but like, why are we interested in doing that, and how does that kind of align with our thinking on the signage industry?
Yeah. So when we moved away from being exclusive to the Raspberry Pi and adopted our Screenly Player Max, as part of that process, we started generalizing our platform a bit more towards x86 or PC-based devices, and we obviously do sell our PC-based system, but there's no reason why we can run on other hardware. So we have, we know our platform runs on Intel NUCs, for instance, with given specific requirements. And the reason behind it was really to allow people to either retrofit their existing devices, and that obviously has a environmental impact. So there's a little green element to that, or people don't have to buy new devices per se. And the other side of it is a large number of enterprises, they have negotiated deals with suppliers. So let's say you're in a Dell shop, what you will pay for a computer with the equivalent specs of, say, our Screenly Player Max will be heavily discounted because you're buying large quantities from Dell, HP, insert blank. So that was kind of the thinking around this. Like, why don't we let people bring their own devices and run Screenly on them? And we are exposing that program and developing that in tangent with larger customers. So it's not designed for, hey, I have 2 NUCs and I want to run Screenly on them. No, that's not the point. The point is, I have 500 NUCs and I'm an enterprise. That's kind of the thinking behind it, to let people in that kind of situation use the Screenly device, use Screenly on their devices. So that's kind of thinking behind it. So
not pulling out their IT drawer of associated cords at a mom and pop saying, "Oh, I have something that looks like a chip. Let me see if I can." There's an MOQ for this program where which we might lift in the future as depending how things go. But right now there's a minimum MOQ. I think we set it to like
50 units or something like that as a MOQ for this program. Because there is hand holding involved, there is definitely debugging and testing involved. So we wouldn't be interested in doing this for like a one-off.
For those who are listening, maybe they, people who are running IT departments or something, is there something? Are there any key components of hardware that we would not support in this program?
Yeah, so we set the minimum bar for an Intel i3, I think, and then we need 8 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage. So that's kind of the minimum requirements for specs. But then we also need a TPM to run the cryptographic side of our operations. But those are largely the hard requirements. So it's an Intel-based i3, and then anything beyond that should be fine in theory. But that's kind of minimum deployment footprint that we require for this.
But I mean, if you think you have something that will do the job, just send us a note, and we'll deal with it on a case by case. So,
absolutely, cool. Let's dive into the product, Daniel. Do you want to take a kind of start talking about the new UI that we shipped? Maybe we can start talking about that.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. So,
or the backstory actually would be even a good start.
Sure. Well, where should we start with that? So, okay, well, Screenly, first of all, we love our name no matter what anyone says. But the LY at the end is very much a, record keeper of when Screenly got started, right? Early 2010s. That was the go-to. We even still have our active Screenly.io address. And that was part of our history. That's where it started. It also started with the cursive logo. That was a classic as well. So we had all the hallmarks there, and it got the job done, right? I mean, we went from 0 screens to 10,000 plus, right? So, but it was time to get with the times and modernize. Just modernize our look and feel, right? So we did that first with the, we call it the marketing site, just everything that's pre-sign-in. We did that first, gave it a more of a darker base, and wanted to show off our main components. Like, of course we do signage, but we're not just upload and schedule content. We have a ton of features for really putting developers first, and we wanted to highlight that in our interface. So we had that. It was great, and basically we were like, okay, the actual user interface on the inside needs to not look like a different product, of course. And we just we recently released that, and I think does a good job.
Yeah, it's looking a lot sleeker and a lot consistent, and all the building blocks are the same. Largely, we decided to keep the framework the same for the time being, to not shock the users too much, but rather just introduce a visual overhaul before we start unpicking a lot of the structure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's definitely larger reworks that are in the pipeline. Even some things that I think for some of the team are hard to part from. For example, our dashboard map, right? Everyone likes a good map, but in reality, you're not a government intelligence unit on a James Bond movie trailer. You don't really need to see like locations of your screens because you know where they are, and that's not changing.
Depends on the size of or deployment. To be fair, there are definitely use cases for it, but yeah.
It's more of leans on the cool side of the spectrum versus useful. So
correct.
Anyway, so things like that, you'll see general changes, but So Screenly, a company that was born in early 2010s, is now in the 2024s, and onwards and upwards. So
yes, indeed.
But the menu item here that you see has a new companion that is very important to bring up, which is our new Edge app store. So
That's right. Should we, before we dive into actually show and tell, should we talk a bit about the backstory of that? So we shipped the Edge app framework, which is our screen developer platform, really, where we betting a big chunk of our future on. And those who are not familiar with it, it's essentially a screen operating system. I'm going to say operating in quotation marks because the nerds out there will fault me for saying that it's an operating system, but it's essentially a runtime environment for people to build developer experiences on for screens, with the view of the future of being able to power everything from a wayfinding machine to obviously signage to even like an ATM or a self checkout counter. So that's kind of our long-term view of that. So we shipped our Edge app runtime environment in the fall, and we then shipped our CLI before that, our command line interface, which is how you build and interact with Edge apps. And
has it been a year on that with our CLI?
Yeah, that must be about a year since we shipped the CLI. That's right. So it's open source. It's on GitHub. It's kind of a reference implementation of our API. So that's kind of we dog feed a lot of our API using the CLI as well to make sure we have a good experience there. And what we realized was that we kind of really wanted to. Well, we realized this from the start before we even launched Edge apps that we wanted to have a kind of an app store on top of Edge apps, and we have now finally shipped this. And what it is really just a more user-friendly way of consuming Edge apps. And all our Edge apps are on the GitHub repository, our playground GitHub repository, and this basically makes it just easier to consume these. And that was kind of the backstory of this.
For the non-developers, and I would with no shame very much put myself in that camp. CLIs can be very scary.
Yes.
They are not a welcoming home as they are to many developers. Victor, I know you feel warm and cozy there. But from just looking at our user base, it worked really well for a lot of people, but it was really gatekeeping the value of our Edge apps from people. And so there needed to be some type of intermediary point where people could still get all of the benefits of Edge apps, but have a little bit more of the point and click functionality of the interface to get them up and running.
That is absolutely a valid point. So let's dive into a show and tell. We have a screen paired up here so we can actually share on the screen, but I'm just going to disable the current playlist that we have here so that we can, actually show on the screen what Edge apps are all about. So new Edge app, and you now have a set of Edge apps available. Let's start with a clock because it's a very simple example.
And Power BI in there I saw, which we recently just added.
That is correct. So we now going to install our clock app. And this is a repository that we got to build out pretty aggressively this coming year and build up more of these. And you can do a lot of things with clock app. You can override the locale, meaning the localization, the time zone, and all that stuff. But we're not going to bother with that right now. We're just going to install our clock app. And once I've installed that, I can then go to my playlist. And then I'm going to create a new playlist called Demo that I'm going to target my tester screen. So let's target a tester screen here. And then let's add my demo clock. And then it was added. And then save. And that should now sync up fairly quickly, I believe. So it's still out of sync, but it should sync up pretty quickly.
Yep.
And hopefully within a matter of minutes, it should bring up a screen. There you go. It's starting to render. And whilst we do that, whilst we wait for that to load, let's just create another one. Let's create a weather app for good measures and install demo weather. And then you can override some things here, but let's not bother with that. We just really just want to do the demo. And then go back to playlists and let's schedule our weather app as well. Demo weather. There we go. And save that.
You look like you're familiar with the Screenly interface, Victor.
I've used it once or twice, yes. Let's see if the screen is still out of sync. So take a bit of time to kick off here. But this is all the same so far. The way you interface with what these edge apps is the same as you would interface with a regular image or video or anything really.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, that's
So they come as part of the with Screenly. There is the content playlist and screens. So you have a content asset. You assign that to a playlist where you can organize and edit it and schedule it, and then you add that to a screen. So with our Edge apps, that install works essentially just as a earlier point on that whole process where the Edge app, you install it, and then it becomes a possible content item that you can then add to the playlist and then schedule as you want. So, and that's what Victor was just, demonstrating here.
That is correct. And what we can do then is we can show you the other application we have. So we have a Power BI application as well. So the Power BI is essentially, it's probably the most secure way to do Power BI dashboards in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually really harness the security functionalities of Edge apps and really make sure they are highlighted in this deployment. And we built and deployed this for a Fortune 500 company, and they've been very happy with the security posture of that, which was a big concern of theirs.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, on many of those Power BI dashboards that they have, there is sensitive information that they would not want in the hands of their competitors or journalists. They'd just rather not have out in the open. So in order to avoid that, you have to make those protected by authentication. And I'd say that's probably the biggest theme of digital signage integrations is how do you get the player device to bypass, or not bypass, but to get through those authentication methods in a way that's reliable. So, yeah,
that's absolutely true. Yeah. As you can see, the clock is displaying here now on screen, and while that's showing, while you see the weather as well.
Weather switches over. Amazing.
Yeah, and let's just add a RSS feed. So we have demo RSS. So this can be any RSS feed. So you can use whatever source of news that you would like. The default one is BBC, but you can use anything you want really. And we want to call this, we call the BBC News actually. Let's leave it at that, and we can say let's fit 6 items on the screen, and then we install that, and that should then create a new installation of our demo RSS reader. And then if we go back to playlists and our demo, we can add this one as well. So RSS, and then we added that, and we just wait that will sync up. So and this is, go ahead, Andy.
Well, I was going to say, little trip down memory lane. So, the RSS feed here that's set up as an Edge app, completely different, but it's a nice reminder of. I think the RSS reader was like one of our first. I don't know if we even call them apps, but back when we had like the WordPress site content.
Oh yes,
app.
That's right.
I mean, essentially, we were just we were loading web pages, right? And we were displaying web page content, which can get the job done. There's even web page based content feeds that we like. We encourage people to use now. um, but they have their limitations.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what's important to point out is that all these edge apps, whilst they might look like just regular web pages, they run directly on the device, and that's kind of the big difference. They're not hosted somewhere else. They actually are hosted directly on the device, which means a great deal for stability and scalability, because you're not depending on a third-party service or a web hosting provider to actually serve this content. The weather app, for instance, is running local on the device, and it's pushing down or pulling down the weather and processes all of it directly on the device, and that makes a huge difference for reliability. So that's why it's an important building block in our system here, and to really what we're really bullish on the future for.
Reliability and also time. I mean, when someone says like, okay, it happens instantly, like, okay, let's open that up. What does instantly actually mean? Does it mean a couple seconds or a couple milliseconds? And like, while that sounds like kind of stupid to talk about, it's really not for many applications. Like, you need instantaneous, interactions, and when they take a couple seconds, that is noticeable to the customers, and you essentially forego the magic of whatever you're trying to display, whether it's like point of sales integrations. We talked earlier about like, items in a supermarket and integrating with those types of sensors. What's the like brain perception milliseconds? What is that?
Oh, you have, I think Spotify did some research way back when. I think it's anything below 200 milliseconds is indistinguishable from instant for the human brain.
Yeah, I know that that it's like a fancy email client, Superhuman or something. I remember they were talking about that too, where, just trying to work on product where, speed is important. Like, seconds matter. Maybe more so just in the perception rather than actual, end result. But that's not achievable if you're, pinging back and forth to a server.
Doing real-time stuff can be definitely important when we do this thing. So that's really cool. So we covered then the app story, or the Edge App Store, really. And then I guess to wrap things up, let's talk a bit more about the security thing. So we did a penetration test in December with a world-leading expert on cloud-native security. So we work with them on enhancing our security posture on our cloud infrastructure. And so that was a really good learning experience, and we came back with good results, which is very reassuring for our engineering team and architects that we've done a good job on that. And that also kind of paves the way for our next step, which is we're doing a SOC 2 certificate, which is a compliance framework. It is a big deal. That's a compliance framework that a lot of larger enterprises require vendors to have gone through, which requires you to basically get all your ducks in a row for how your infrastructure is configured, how it's documented. It's a lot of processes that you need to get right. So that's something that's really interesting to go through as we make sure that we get all our ducks in a row. And so that's something that we're beginning to do. I believe the schedule to start next month, actually. So getting pretty close to that. So that's another thing that's happening on our end from a secure perspective that's really exciting.
Well, and for all the, large enterprise customers who are excited to use Screenly, I think this will really just check that box and allow them to streamline their whole onboarding and, checklists with their end. So
Exactly. Amazing. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground today, Neil. Is there anything else you want to bring up?
Yeah, we definitely did. Some things coming up in the near future, releases. Maybe we can just say a word or two about our security user pin.
Yes.
And how that'll integrate with support. So basically, well, first of all, at Screenly, we've done a massive push in our customer support, customer success area, where we just upped the response time a lot with our support.
Yeah, I think we're down now.
Like,
I think we're down now to like first response is less than an hour across all support tickets, 24/5, which is, I think, really good.
Yeah, which is good. I mean, you want that for any type of any product, but particularly with signage, like when things are running smoothly, things are running smoothly. When they're not, they're not, and you need a solution quickly, right? And like the thing with signage is like it's literally meant to be seen. That's the whole point. And so when there is an issue, that is seen, and it's seen quickly, and it's seen by like basically everyone's coworkers, and in many cases like potential customers. And it's like, okay, you don't want to look stupid, and no matter what it is, there's going to be points where you need some help. So anyway, so on the support side, we added this security feature that I think is going to streamline things.
So let's talk about the backstory of that. So this really comes from I think it was Namecheap that had, way back when, they got compromised using their support system, where somebody impersonated some user and was able to essentially gain access to their domains and used as an attack vector. So they introduced something that we've designed our system around, which we call it support token, essentially. And the idea is to give our customer success team a way to ensure that they are speaking to who they think they are speaking to. So with Zendesk support tickets, with support tickets in general, we can usually tie them to an email, but sometimes we need a second method to reassure that the customer is that person that they claim to be. So that's why we created this idea of a support token. And this is more important when you start adding support over, say, Facebook Messenger, where you're not as tightly integrated into the system and you're more prone for attack vectors. So we have now shipped that, and we kind of shuffle things around a little bit in our security panel or settings panel to shuffle around security a bit. So there's some bits and pieces there that are improving the security posture, really, and really to mitigate or minimize the attack vector against account compromises, which is, if you look at security at large, the human attack vector is always the biggest attack vector. That's where most companies get compromised, most sophisticated companies get compromised from. So that's kind of like what we want to make sure that we operate with industry best practices and really ensure that we do as much as we can on our end to ensure that there's no leak there or no attack vector there.
And with signage too, I mean, the hacks you hear are more so like the, I don't want to say it funnily, but like, pretty funny content overtakes where like
defamation more so than anything.
Like and it's like a huge billboard, right? And okay, not good for brand image, but that's not it. I mean, it can also be an attack vector for getting into an entire business's system and database and personal information. So it's not just, okay, people are showing stuff they're not supposed to.
Yeah, exactly. We went through some of these attack vector simulations when we did our last pen test, and there was an attack in a Las Vegas casino a few years ago where they managed to the attacker managed to compromise the smart aquarium pump over Bluetooth, and then use that as a stepping stone onto the rest of the network. And that's how basically they attacked the casino. So they managed to compromise the casino's networking infrastructure using a smart aquarium pump. And those are kind of examples of like where...
First of all, impressed.
Yes. Absolutely. But it's an interesting one. Like, it's unrelated to the personal attack vector that we just spoke of, but it's one of the things that I think people in the signage industry do not take security nearly as serious as they should be doing. If you look at the security posture on so many software vendors in the signage industry, they are so far behind. Like, they don't even do vulnerability scanning. Like, we know that they have vulnerabilities in their software stack, in their operating systems. Their operating system might be even end of life, and that's horrendous for so many reasons. And we should probably do that in a separate episode and deep dive a bit further in that, because I have so many thoughts around that, and really advice for people that are looking at security of their signage, because that really should be a top priority when you're deploying signage, because it's, if you get that wrong, that could have devastating consequences for your company. But we can talk about that. We should probably talk about that in the later episode, because we're kind of on time for this one right now.
Yeah, no, I think this is a good. I mean, so this is our first recorded changelog. I think it's we'll be producing these, roughly every month, maybe with a little higher frequency depending on industry news. But you'll hear from us again. I think I gotta say I definitely think it was a good decision that we did not do our first recording on his screens in Barcelona. Victor, what do you think?
That is true. I was sick, and we sat in a very loud hotel, so it's probably wouldn't have produced very good quality.
Yeah. So Victor and I were recently at the ISE conference in Barcelona, and we're like, okay, we'll be physically in person. This will be a great time to do this first recording. And the venues we were thinking of doing it in, when we got there, we were immediately like, okay, this is, far. This is a cafe that kind of wishes it was a nightclub, and this is not great for our sound quality. So
no, I think that was a good choice.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. Pleasure.
Yeah,
and
this has been fun. Thanks everyone for listening.
Next episode. Yeah. Cheers.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Adios. Bye.